Hello, this is Laura Richcreek with Laura's Voice, and this is Laura Reads Foxed Books. Thanks for joining me. I am so glad you're here. We see some growth in this chapter and some regret. Regret can hold us down, or it can be useful, like a springboard, to boost us toward new resolve and away from repeating the things that led to that regret. Well, there, I just summed it up for you. Now you don't need to listen to this week's episode. Wait, please listen to this episode. And hit like, leave a comment. Be sure you're subscribed to the channel. Thanks. Now, without further ado, let's read The Old Gentleman of the Blackstock. Chapter 11. A Warning and an Example. Sweet are the uses of adversity, no doubt, but for all that it does not commend itself to a young man. If adversity happen to take the form of a particularly pretty girl's refusal to see him when he happens to think her the one girl in all the world for him. I was enabled to make this observation from experience. I tried adversity's sweet milk philosophy, but to no purpose. I found it crabbed and hard, as ever the roughest pagan found it. I summoned reason to my aid and plainly proved how foolish my view was. Women could not be so unlike each other, I argued. I pointed out the folly of ruining my happiness and my life because, forsooth, one woman of all the countless myriads in the world refused to be my mate. A girl whom only 2 or 3, or at least a half-dozen men thought in any way superior to the rest, and in whom all the others saw no more than in any fair face, soft voice, gentle air, and kindly ways. The chances were, I clearly showed, that I was wrong, the rest of mankind right. All to no purpose. My coolest summing up of judgment went down like straw before my heart's advocacy in the simple reply, I love her. I was bewitched. I knew it, and yet I could not stir, although at times I raged against myself like a poor beast tangled in a net. I knew I was hopelessly caught, and for the most part submitted dumbly. Unfortunately for me, there was no war then in progress, or I should probably have gone and left the obdurate creature to repine for having missed the imperishable laurels I should gain, and mourn too late the fatal madness of driving such a paladin of courage to despair. I thought of going west and reaping there the large rewards of my abilities, but I doubted whether civic spoils would touch her, and I hesitated to take a step which would proclaim my defeat. I knew enough of war to know that after a battle he that sleeps on the field is held the victor, though he may have suffered most. So, though stricken sorely, I held the field and faced the world. Adversity winnows one's friends like a sieve. I first lost happiness, then appetite, then sleep. They follow each other like the numerals 1, 2, 3. I, who had never known what it was to be conscious of an hour between the time I went to bed and that when my alarm clock awoke me, any more than if I had crossed the bed from night to day, now thrashed around for hours and vainly waited with stout resolution and firmly closed eyes the coming of sleep. I never knew before how stealthy sleep is, or how coy. My friends began to remark to me on my changed appearance. At least those whom I might term my second-best friends did so, to my annoyance. My closest friends only looked anxiously and tried in secret, easily discoverable ways to divert me. Some of them went so far as to try to find another girl for me. But surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird. I could not be caught even with so fair a bait as they proposed. Thisbe was a grey eye or so, but not to the purpose. I felt that my case was different from all the others in their lexicon of experience. Like the man in the grammar, I would be destroyed. No one should help me. Time, however, is the great helper. He works with a secrecy that steals through our alertest watch and overcomes our stoutest defenses. He gives the buried seed help to burst its shell and make its way up to the light. He lends his aid to soothe the sorest hurt, and as he helps to knit the lacerated flesh, so he helps to heal the deeper wounds of the spirit. In time my pride awoke, and did what my friends had not been able to effect. Then accident helped me even against my will. Among my friends was one in whose society I had always found a great deal of pleasure. She was no more like Elizabeth Dale with her extremes of cruelty and sympathy, her pitfalls of sauciness, her unexpectedness, her infinite variety and unvarying charm, than I was like St. Francis of Assisi. But she was clever, intelligent, and high-minded, and she was very sympathetic with me. I saw a great deal of her, and was aware that my friends were associating our names. As Miss Elizabeth Dale was now off teaching, I had no fear of her hearing too much of my consolement. Winter had now come to the rest of the world, as well as to my heart, and winter always gives courage. Christmas was approaching. A freeze gave us the coveted opportunity to skate, and I took my friend skating. As we were returning across the fields and reached a fence on the roadside, she complained that one of her hands was quite numbed by the cold, and I undertook to warm it by rubbing it, though it was cold work. I was engaged in the dismal task when she gave a little exclamation and quietly drew her hand away. I glanced up just in time to see Elizabeth Dale look away as she came down the hill. The next second she turned her eyes our way and gave us a smiling greeting. She had just come home for the holidays. My friend laughed at my discomfort. It was just my luck. In my time of tribulation, I began to think of many persons and things that I had rather forgotten in the times of my prosperity, and among them was old Mr. Basham Miles. I had not seen him on the street during the whole fall, as I generally did at that season of the year, and one day I asked William about him. He told me that he was at home ill. He had come back from the country sick, and had been confined to his room ever since.
"Fact is, sir, I's mighty troubled 'bout him," said the old servant. "He ain't getting no better, just getting punier and punier. I don't believe he's going to last much longer."
This was serious, and I questioned him as to what the old gentleman said.
"He don't do nothing 'cept sit there all day in de big chair," he said. "He used to read all the time, night and day, but he don't even do dat no longer."
"Who is with him?"
"There's nobody with him, sir. He won't have nobody. He never was no hand for having folks 'bout him pesterin' him nohow. Strange folks expressly. He wouldn't even have a doctor to come to see him after old Dr. Thomas died. He used to come sometimes. Since then he wouldn't have nobody. But me and Jane got him to let me go and ask Dr. Williams to come and see him. And he say he pretty sick, and give him some physic. But he wouldn't a take it, sir. He say he gwine die anyhow, and he ain't gwine to take no nasty physic. He got the bottle there now in he room, and it just full as it was when I bring it from the drugstore."
I said that I would go and see him.
"Yes, sir, wish you would. Maybe he would see you. Maybe he won't. He mighty fond of you. He won't see many folks. Several ladies been to inquire after him, and Mrs. Miller, she and Anna Lady, too, sent him things. But he won't see nobody, and he won't eat nothing. I's right smartly troubled about him, sir."
I was troubled, too, and repeated my intention of calling to see him.
"I tell you, sir," the old servant said suddenly, "a man ought to have wife and children to take care on him when he get old anyhow."
I had not thought of this view of the case before, but it did not strike me as wholly unreasonable. When I called to see Mr. Miles that evening, he received me. I was shocked to find what a change there was in him since I had seen him last. I was shown through the cold and dark hall and by the vacant library, the door of which stood open as I passed, and the fireplace of which showed empty and black, and up the wide stairs to the room Mr. Miles occupied. He was sitting up in his old armchair by the fire, which was the only cheerful thing I had seen in the house. If I had thought the old man lonely when I was there before, much more he seemed so now. He was absolutely solitary. A row of books was on the table beside him, but their very number was an evidence that he had no appetite for them, and had them but to taste. The only volume that looked as if he had been using it was an old Bible. It lay nearest him on his table and had a marker in it. He was only partly dressed, and had on an old, long, flowered dressing-gown and slippers, presenting a marked contrast to his general neatness of apparel, whilst a beard, which he had allowed to grow for a month or more, testified to his feebleness, and added to the change in his appearance. I never saw a picture of dejection greater than he presented as I entered. His head was sunk on his breast, and loneliness seemed to encircle him round almost palpably. I think my visit cheered him a little, though he was strangely morose, and spoke of the world with unwonted bitterness. He was, however, manifestly pleased at my coming to see him, though he dwelt on the regret he felt at the trouble he caused me. I tried to interest him in books and engage him in talking of them, but he declared that they were like people. They interested only when one was strong and vigorous, and deserted you when you were ill or unfortunate.
"They fail you at the crucial time, sir," he said bitterly. "They forsake you or bore you."
I said I hoped they were not so bad as that.
"Yes, sir, they are,"
he asserted testily.
"I esteemed them my friends, lived with them, cultivated them, and at the very moment when I needed them most, they failed me."
He reached over and took up the old Bible from his table.
"This book alone," he said, "has held out. This has not deserted me. I have read something of all the philosophies, but none has the spirituality and power that I find in certain parts of this. No wonder Scott said, 'There is but one book.'"
He laid the book down again, and I picked it up idly and opened it at the place where his paper was. A marked passage caught my eye. "As one whom his mother comforteth." I laid the book back from where I had taken it.
"That volume was my mother's,"
said the old man softly.
"She died with it on her pillow, as she had lived with it in her heart."
I persuaded him before I left to let me send a doctor to see him, and coming away I went by and saw Dr. Williams, one of the leading physicians in the town, who said he would go to him at once. I called to see the doctor next day to ask about the old fellow, and he said he was a very ill man. "He is going to die," said the doctor calmly. "Well, doctor, ought not he to have someone to stay with him?" I asked. "Of course he ought," said the doctor, "and I have told him so. But he is a very difficult man to deal with. What can you do with him? He is going to die anyhow, and knows it, and he says the idea of anyone staying in the house with him makes him nervous. I have told his man William to stay in the house tonight, but I don't know that he will let him do it." I went to see Mr. Miles that night, for I was very anxious about him, and found William much stirred up, and sincerely glad to see me. He had proposed to stay with him as the doctor had directed, but the old gentleman had positively forbidden it.
"He won't have nobody round him 'tall, sir,"
said the old servant hopelessly.
2 or 3 people been here to see him today, but he won't see none on 'em. He'll hardly see me, and he tell me when bedtime come just to shut up as usual and let him alone. But I'm going to stay in that house tonight, don't care what he say,"
said the old servant positively. I asked if he thought the old gentleman would see me, and we agreed that the best thing for me to do was to go right up and announce myself. So I did it, and found him sitting up as before. He looked, if anything, feebler than he had done the evening before. He talked in a weaker voice and was more drowsy. He said he could not lie down. I made up my mind to sit up with him that night if he did not actually drive me out of the house. So, after a time, as he seemed sleepy, I settled myself comfortably in an armchair, which I emptied of a score of books. I think my presence comforted him, for he said little and simply drowsed on. Toward midnight he roused up, and having taken a stimulant which the doctor had left him, seemed stronger and rather inclined to talk. The first question he asked surprised me. He said suddenly,
"Is your mother living?"
I told him that she was.
"That is the greatest blessing a man can have," he said. "Mine died when I was 10 years old, and I have never gotten over the loss. I have missed her every hour since. Had she lived, my life might have been different. It might not then have been the failure which it has been."
I was surprised to hear him speak so of himself, for I had always thought of him as one of the most self-contained of men, and I made some polite disavowal of his remark. He turned on me almost fiercely.
"Yes, sir, it has been a complete and utter failure."
He spoke bitterly.
"I was a man of parts, and look at me now. A woman's influence might have changed me."
As he appeared inclined to talk, I prepared to listen. He seemed to find a grim pleasure in talking of himself and reviewing his life. His mother's death he continued to dwell on.
"She used to sit out on that seat under the beech tree,"
he told me.
"and I love that tree better than almost anything in the world. It is associated with almost every happy moment I have ever spent. Young man," he said, sitting up in the energy of his speech, "marry. Marry. I do not say marry for your own happiness, though heaven knows I am a proof of the truth of my words, dying here alone and almost friendless, but marry for the good you may accomplish in the world and the happiness you may give others."
Not to marry, he said, was the extreme of selfishness. For if a man does not marry, generally it is because he is figuring for something more than love. He then told me that his great fault was selfishness.
"I made one mistake, sir,"
he said,
"early in life, and it has lasted me ever since. I put brains before everything, intellect before heart. It was all selfishness. That was the rock on which I split. I was a man of parts, sir, and I thought that with my intellect I could do everything. But I could not."
I began to think of my own life.
"Young man, were you ever in love?"
he asked. Under the sudden question I stammered and finally said I did not know. I believed I had been, but it was over now, anyhow.
"Young man,"
he said,
treasure it. Treasure it as your life. I was in love once, really, in love only once, and I believed I had my happiness in my own hands, and I flung it away and wrecked my life."
He then proceeded to tell me the story of his love affair, and how, instead of being content with the affection of the lovely and beautiful girl whose heart he had won, he had wanted to excel with every one and to shine in all eyes.
"And I simply flung away salvation,"
he said.
"I am not speaking groundlessly,"
he asserted,
"for I was not even left the poor consolation of doubt as to whether I should have succeeded. When at last I awoke from my besotted condition, my chance was gone. The woman for whom I had given up the one I loved, because I thought she would advance me in life, proved as shallow and heartless as I was myself. And after I had made my plans and prepared my house for her, threw me over remorselessly for what she deemed a better match, and married a rich fool. And when at length I went back to the woman I loved, and offered her my heart, which, indeed, had always been hers, she had given hers to another. Heaven knows I did not blame her, for though I have been fool enough to despise him, he was 1,000 times worthier of her than I was, and made her 1,000 times happier than I should have done with my selfishness. She told me that she had cared for me once, and might have married me had I spoken, but that time was long past, and she now loved another better than she had ever loved me. My pride was stung, but I fell back on my intellect, and determined again to marry brilliantly. I might have done so, perhaps, but I could not forget the woman I loved, and I was not quite base enough to offer again an empty heart to another woman, and so the time passed by. I had means enough to obviate the necessity of working for my support, and so did not work as I should have done had I been dependent on my profession. And men who had less than half my intellect outstripped me. At length, having no incentive to labor, I threw up my profession and traveled abroad. In time, that failed me, and I returned to my beech tree only to find that I had dropped out of the current of life, and had exchanged the happiness of a home for the experiences of a wanderer. I had lost the universal touch in all the infinite little things which make up the sum of life, and even my friends, with few exceptions, were not just what they had been. If they were necessary to me, I was no longer necessary to them. They had other ties, had married, had children, and new interests formed in my absence. I found myself alone, everywhere a visitor, welcomed at some places because I was agreeable when I chose to be, tolerated at others, but still only a visitor, an outsider, an alien. Then I fell back on my books. They lasted me for a while, and I read omnivorously, but only for amusement. And in time my appetite was satiated and my stomach turned. I had not the tastes of a scholar, nor even of a student, but only those of a dilettante. I was too social to enjoy long alone even books, and I did not read for use. So I turned to the world again, to find it even worse than it had been before. I was as completely alone as if I had been on a desert island, and it was too late for me to re-enter life.
I do not mean to give this as a connected speech, for it was not. It was what he said at times through the long night, as he dwelt on the past and felt like talking. Finally he broke in suddenly.
"Cultivate the affections, young man. Cultivate the affections. Take an old man's word for it, that the men who are happy are those who love and are loved. Better love the meanest thing that lives than only yourself. Even as a matter of policy it is best. I had the best intellect of any young man of my time and set, and I have seen men with half my brains, under the inspiration of love and the obligations and duties it creates, go forward to success which I could never achieve. Whilst I was narrowing and drying up, they were broadening and reaching out in every direction. Often I have gone along the street and envied the poorest man I met with his children on their holiday strolls. My affections had been awakened but too late in life, and I could not win friendship then. That child that you had in your arms the day I met you was the first child I had seen in years who looked at me without either fear or repugnance."
He sat back in a reverie. The old man had, of course, mentioned no names, but I had recalled the conversation of the two ladies that evening, and now, under his earnestness, I was drawn to admit that I had been in love, and feared I was yet. He was deeply interested, and when I told him that he had already had his part in my affair, he was no less astonished. Then I recalled to him the advice he had given me on the street corner on that May morning several years before. He remembered the incident of the carriage with its burden of young girls, but he had had no idea I was the young man. He was evidently pleased at the coincidence.
"So, you took my advice and picked a girl out of that very carriage, did you?"
His wan face lit with the first smile I had seen on it since I had been with him.
"Whose carriage was it, and what was her name, if you do not mind telling an old man?"
he asked. Then, as I hesitated a little, he said gently,
"Oh, no matter. Don't feel obliged to tell me."
"No," I said. "I was only thinking. It was the Hill and Dale carriage, and her name is Elizabeth Dale."
"Elizabeth Dale?"
he said, his eyes opening wide as they rested on my face. And then, as he turned to the fire and let them fall, he said to himself,
"How strange. Has she beauty?"
he inquired presently, after a reverie. in which he repeated to himself softly over and over,
"Very strange."
"I think she has," I said, "and others think so too. I believe you do yourself."
"How is that? I have never seen her."
"Yes, you have," I said. "Do you remember your hat blowing off one day last spring on Richardson Street, and a young girl running out of a house bareheaded and catching it for you? Well, that was Elizabeth Dale."
"Was it indeed?"
he said, and then added,
"I ought to have known it. She looked so like her. Only I thought it was simply her beauty which made the resemblance. All youth and beauty coupled with sweetness have brought up Elizabeth Green to me through the years,"
he said gently. "And the child who offered you the bread and jam that day was her nephew." But he was now past further surprise and simply said,
"Indeed. Do you think she would come and see me?"
he asked me presently, after a long reverie, in which he had been looking into the fire. I said I was sure she would if she knew he wished it, and then I went off into a reverie too.
"Cannot you bring her?"
he asked. "Why, I do not know. Yes, I suppose she would come with me, only, why, yes, I could see if she would."
"Ask her to come and see an old man who has not long to stay here, and who wishes to see the girl whom you are going to marry."
"But I am not going to marry her," I said. "We barely speak now."
"Then the girl to whom you barely speak now,"
he said with something of a smile, and then added gravely,
"the girl who picked up his hat for him, an old man who knew her mother."
I promised to do my best to get Miss Dale to come and see him, and then the old fellow dropped off into a doze, which soon became a sounder sleep than he had had at all. End of Chapter 11. This has been The Old Gentleman of the Blackstock by Thomas Nelson Page, illustrated by Howard Chandler Christie. This book is in the public domain. Original copyright is 1897. This edition, copyright 1901. Production copyright 2025 by Laura E. Rich Creek. Thanks for being here. See you next week.